Hey guys, welcome to Monday. I'm filming this on Tuesday because I was absolutely dead yesterday after work. I didn't get a lot of sleep because I had some noodles at Charmaine's parents' place that Charmaine's mum cooked, and something wasn't quite right about them. Both Charmaine and I felt kind of sick, and Charmaine managed to get over it, but I didn't. So I didn't get a lot of sleep last night because um, I felt like I was gonna vomit basically, and so I didn't actually go vomit. I probably should have gone and vomited and felt better, but I didn't. So I didn't get a lot of sleep, and so then I had to basically power through Monday's teaching. And given that it was a fairly challenging topic as well, it's probably not the best idea. It's my friend Hang Chang. He's got a friend who's in trouble. We're trying to work through that. So I just had a lot of coffee yesterday on Monday and powered through it. So if I hadn't had the noodles, I probably would have felt a little bit better, gotten a bit more sleep. So I didn't do any vlog yesterday. I instead decided just to sleep. So I'm doing today's vlog now. And it's actually kind of lucky that I'm doing today's vlog now because I saw a message from someone who has a YouTube name in Cyrillic script. I'm not actually sure what this person's name is or who they are, but they know about my infamous meme page, and they're fairly sympathetic to Marxism, and they're probably more solidly Hegelian, really, and they're having some doubts about communism or Marxism, and I figured I'd go through some of the objections to Marxism maybe, or some of the reasons why you might not be so crash hot on being a communist anymore or being a Marxist anymore, even though you might take Das Kapital to be part of your canon, or take the Grundrisse to be part of your canon, because yesterday, and by yesterday I mean like for today's vlog on Monday, because this is Monday's vlog, for Monday, we had the topic of communism and Marxism in the PH 100 class that I was teaching, and I teach a lot of middle class people, and and a lot of people who have never really worked a proper job before, who don't work full time, and don't actually pay rent or pay a mortgage, so they had some interesting ideas about Marxism. And some of them were fairly hostile to the idea, and definitely towards my last class, like I had someone not attack me, but make me feel really defensive, and like I had to wonder today, why did I have such a defensive reaction to what this person was saying? Because I ended up being a little bit too forceful against one young woman whose parents came from quote unquote communist Poland. I said no, I don't actually consider the Soviet bloc to have ever really been communists, because they weren't. This is getting way too deep, but I said to her, I'm telling you, Poland was not communist, and I think it was a little bit too forceful, really, and I had to wonder. Like I was like, wow, I don't normally get that heated as a person. Like I don't normally get that worked up that quickly, and it's because like, being a Marxist is like who I am, right? I know this is going to sound really YouTube. I am a communist. I believe that we should have a society that is structured around giving people what they need, right? The correct form of society that we should have is one where people's needs are met as easily and as efficiently as possible. And the best way to do that is to get people to contribute spontaneously and creatively. That would be the best kind of society. So, and a lot of people in my class said, yeah, no, that sounds like a great idea, but I don't think we'll ever get there. And to that I would say, I think you need some more empirical evidence. But, because communism is such a big part of my personality and how I would like to relate to people, to have someone so, not violently, but like so, and not recklessly, like these words keep coming up in my head, but it's difficult to put it into phrase this correctly. The person was very enthusiastic about absolutely denying that communism could never work, and this person had some fairly inaccurate descriptions of, first of all, what communism is, how communism is meant to come about, and what communism ostensibly advocated itself to be. So, I was educated in the tradition through socialist alternative to understand that, the Soviet bloc was probably more of a society that you could describe as state capitalists. And I'm not really sure if a lot of my comrades actually agree with this assessment. So some people, I think maybe like a few of my older comrades who were in the Communist Party of Australia probably don't hold to the state capitalist analysis. They probably think that, Soviet Russia or maybe the Eastern Bloc was a kind of socialism, but it was a very degenerate and not degenerate in the Trotskyist sense, because Trotskyism has a particular interpretation of what the Eastern Bloc was or what the Soviet Union became. It was a degenerated workers' state, so it still was a workers' state. It was just very bureaucratic and run top down. But the tradition that I was brought up with, which I still have some sympathy for, but I'm still not sure. Like, I haven't done the research on this, is to question whether these countries were even communist in the first place. And so, I have some sympathy for this, but I don't hold to it perfectly, right? I haven't looked at all the evidence. I haven't read everything that you need to know about this, but the rough way that I look at this is places like China, or places like Hungary or Poland, or what was Czechoslovakia, the Ukraine. All these places were set up by the Red Army, right? There wasn't actually a workers' revolution in China wasn't set up by the Red Army, it was set up by a peasant revolution. But all of these places are very similar because they were set up by armies or by struggles with weapons, and not by taking control of advanced productive capital plant, right? Like should have happened in Germany in between 1919 and 1923. So the main purpose of having the Russian Revolution was to help Germany have a revolution, and that was the big step to kind of usher in world communism, is to get the most advanced country in the world in terms of technology and industry and social relations, right? Because they had an extremely organized working class through trade unions. The idea was to get Germany to have a revolution, and that was meant to push things on forward and help world revolution. So places like Russia had a proper workers' revolution, but it was extinguished through the Civil War, and the Civil War was where the working class of Russia basically became an army. It became the Red Army, and it fended off the White Army, which was the invading forces of certain parts of the reaction in Russia, but also huge armies from the Western countries. So they were trying to get rid of the workers' revolution in Russia. So what happened was that the Red Army won eventually, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. It was exhausted and decimated. The working class of Russia was decimated. There was no working class in Russia anymore, really, to speak of. And so the big problem was the party was still there, and so the party took over the organs of the state and became bureaucratic and held on to the label of communism, and proceeded to run a country as if it was a big company, right? Like you have leaders in a company who are not necessarily democratically elected, and they get to tell people what to do. That's how the kind of Soviet command economy was set up. And then you have enforced collectivizations and all the awful kinds of things, where you have a top-down approach to communism, which is where you try and tell people this is how you do communism from a position of authority, and that's kind of not really what communism is about. So I'm not sure what I'm trying to get at this, but 20th century communism, one of the big objections that this person with the Cyrillic text name, actually I don't know what to call this person. It's kind of weird how the internet can work like that. 20th century communism, a lot of the ideas that applied to having a revolution still apply to today, right? The idea is to have the working class strike for a while and shut down production, but then restart production through their own democratically run systems, through workers' parliaments or Soviets. That's one of the basic ideas behind how communism is meant to work practically. And we can see these kinds of things happening in May 1968 in France, for instance. So some parts of France started running themselves again without state power, and that was a big threat, right? Like if workers start running production by themselves without needing capital, without needing money, that's a huge threat to the capitalist class because they need these things to run for profit. So the idea is to kind of take over the country democratically, like get the huge mass of people to, and the causal word get sounds a little bit, might sound a bit dictatorial. I've got my dog here. But the idea is that eventually capitalism will stop delivering the goods, right? There'll come a point where applying the concept of money to things that have social utility frustrates the fact that these people, these commodities or whatever, have a social utility. A really good example of this is how the car industry in Australia is kaput. It's no more. And that's because the financial derivatives market in Wall Street or the global financial market caused the price of car exports to plummet, and that made it no longer profitable to make cars in Australia. The only way to make more profit was to continue making cars, but making more cars would make the price of cars even cheaper. So the idea was to stop making cars because it wasn't profitable anymore. But the thing is that we still have all the plant in Australia to make cars. It's still possible to source the materials to make cars. It's still possible to get the people with expertise to make cars. The problem is that it's just not profitable. The fact that the exchange value, the exchange value of all these commodities, or the commodity of making a car at the end, tells you, don't make these cars, even though it's perfectly possible to still make cars. So eventually capitalism is going to get to this point, and it's fairly observable, right? We had the GFC, and it just destroyed the GDP output of America, and for all intents and purposes, the problem hasn't really been solved because there's still huge amounts of private debt, there's still huge amounts of public debt because a lot of the debt of companies was subsidized. Got my doogie here. So we really haven't solved the problem yet, and there might be another. There's a good chance that there's another crisis, where the guy Michael Roberts in the WordPress blog, The Next Recession, predicts that there's going to be a world recession fairly soon. So Marx's big point, right, is to say that applying the concept of money to things, to commodities or to things that have a use value. My dog is trying to talk to me. Doesn't make sense, and eventually it's going to frustrate. Stop barking at me. It's gonna mean that people aren't going to have their needs met, and that's a good time to have a crisis. And so eventually, the idea is to have organizations that teach people to respect themselves or teach people solidarity. And this is not meant to be like a religious conversion or anything. The idea is not to make cults. It's to help people, to show people that we don't need capitalism anymore to run society. And that's why you should be a communist. It's because, and if like this person who commented on my last, one of my last videos, I think it was Thursday's video, they say they still consider capital and the Grundrisse to be part of their canon, then all these things should still make sense. And I think all of the same concepts that Marx talked about under capitalism still work. And so obviously what they might point out is that the 20th century model of communism, that probably might not work because we don't have huge heavy industry here in Australia anymore. I think to a certain extent we still have it in the US, but a lot of the heavy industry has moved to China. But that just brings about the necessity to have a world revolution, right? And there's a very good possibility that we might have a world revolution because all of the big state debt in the US is linked to the purchasing power of what's happening in China, right? Like China is buying the bonds or the special kind of products that allow the US to keep borrowing money. So if they defaulted on those loans, China would be fucked. So the world market is kind of linked together, and if one section of the world market goes down, there's a good chance another section of the market won't go down. And for all I can discern, labor struggle in China is going up. Wages in China are going up because of struggle. So the idea is to truly be an internationalist and support the working class no matter where it is in the world. You know, I think supporting China right now is pretty difficult because of the repressive state apparatus of the Chinese state. But I think the fact that, you know, the world is still producing the same kinds of things that we were before, and just the fact that the regions of the world that produce different things have moved, doesn't necessarily invalidate the kinds of things that Marx was trying to say. And I think that's a good thing. And I think even though Australia's economy is no longer geared towards making cars, the UK's economy is no longer geared towards actually making things, it's all about services or health products, for instance. Like, health products are now a huge section of the Australian economy. Retail is a huge section of the Australian economy. That doesn't invalidate that we have a working class. Some of my comrades say that, like, the working class of the advanced countries has been bought off, and that we have a stake in, like, the world imperialist system. I haven't looked at the evidence behind that, so I don't know how to assess that. I think I have looked at some evidence to argue that that is the case, but I'm not sure, because even though we are paid a larger amount of wages here in Australia, people are still exploited, and so I'm not really sure that the working class in Australia still has a stake in the world capitalist system, if that makes sense. So I'm not really sure. I'm not sure how to assess that. But in any case, I don't think that invalidates what Marx was trying to say. I think it just might make you a third worldist, if that makes sense. It means you should go help struggle in other parts of the world. And I don't think it invalidates what Marx was trying to say. It's interesting because the idea that, you know, the working class of advanced countries has been integrated into the world imperialist system and benefits from the exploitation of third world countries like Thailand or Cambodia to a certain extent, Vietnam, China. I'm not sure if South Korea is included in that, whether South Korea is an advanced economy. I think it's considered an advanced economy, but they're a very big export orientated economy, so I'm not really sure. But these people a lot of the people that I know that argue that the working class in advanced economies has, you know, been integrated into exploiting other people, the other sections of the working class. They're replicating, like, Lenin's labor aristocracy argument, and a lot of these people that I know don't actually like most of what Lenin said. Like, they don't consider themselves Leninists. Like, they like, a few people that I know consider themselves, you know, council communists instead of Leninists. So it's interesting that they might apply Lenin's argument when they don't take the rest of his writings into account. I'm not really sure. It's interesting because some people that I know that aren't third worldists or ex-Maoists or whatever, they apply the labor aristocracy argument to layers of the Australian working class and not to the working class of Australia or the US or the UK as a whole, to explain how the union bureaucracy of these advanced economies sold out the working class. So I mean, I hate to to cop out like this, but I think it is an empirical question. You've got to somehow work out whether these people are being bought off with surplus value in some case, or try and work out how exactly class interests can be frustrated by a position in the world's imperialist system. Because fundamentally, Marx talks about how social being conditions social consciousness, right? Like, some in different ways this quote can be perverted to social existence, but if you're a good Hegelian, you'll know that the word existence carries a little bit of conceptual baggage, so we should be more Aristotelian and say social being in the sense of the concept, right, or the notion. So this is the big upshot of being a Marxist, right? It's the idea that depending on what you do in the capitalist system, or what you do in any economic system or any particular mode of production, that conditions what kind of interest you have in that system. And there's two layers to this. It's like an in itself and a for itself. So workers have no stake in the capitalist system, right? They work for wages. Every time they make something, they get relatively poorer in comparison to the people that they're working for. They're alienated. The special surplus value that they produce doesn't belong to them. It belongs to someone else. And the magical ability that they have to make more value than what they're being paid is the basis for profit, and therefore the basis for exploitation. And there's a bit of a debate about this as to whether exploitation is a moral versus an analytic category. I'm a bit of a bleeding heart, so I think to a certain extent it is a moral category, but that doesn't carry the same kind of liberal, moral baggage that you might think it does. So fundamentally, to be a Marxist is to know that the working class is the kind of not necessarily some sort of transcendental subject that's meant to come in and save the world or whatever. Not that they're a pure class, not that they don't have racist ideas, not that they're not sexist. It's the idea that the working class really does hold the power, or has the ability to move capitalism from where it is at the moment to communism, and that it is possible. And obviously, so that's the subjective element to Marx's theory. And I think it's a good blend, right? If you take a really good Hegelian perspective to this, you don't have to opt for the 1950s Trotskyist, clunky, reductive materialist interpretation of historical materialism, which says the base determines the superstructure. It's like, no, both the base and the superstructure are implicated in every single step of what you do to renew yourself atom for atom. So that's kind of the main upshot of being a Marxist. It's to know that a materialist theory of history is not materialist in a reductive sense, right? It's materialist in a Hegelian sense, right? Marx would completely agree with Hegel when Hegel says that materialism is materialism in the scientific sense is the philosophy of unfreedom. He completely agree. I think he would completely agree with that. Marx's materialist theory of history is thoroughly Hegelian through and through. And I think many of the ideas that Marx has behind labour, social labouring being a fundamental category of his system is borrowed from Hegel, or is directly taken from Hegel. I think Hegel's early Jena or whatever it is, Jena political writings specifically make the same points that Marx makes. So that's how I would elucidate what being a communist is about, and why you should still hang on to being a Marxist or a communist. Because a lot of the same ideas that Hegel talks about are repeated in Marx, or I would argue are more clear in Marx. So in that sense, I completely disagree or question the authenticity of Marx's comments about Hegel in the 1844 manuscripts, because it seems like Marx got Hegel completely wrong in the early works of his. Hegel doesn't think that the world is permeated by some sort of mind or some fundamental spiritual idea, right? And that we need to flip it over and look at things in a reductive materialist sense. Really what Hegel is trying to say is that reality is fundamentally conceptually structured, and that reality has a kind of purpose behind it, and that purpose is the idea. And the purpose of the universal reality is for people to achieve proper intersubjective recognition. And all of these ideas are completely consonant with what Marx is saying. Well, hopefully consonant is the right word. Congruent with what Marx is saying. Communism is the stage in history where people have perfect, or more perfect, intersubjective recognition. It's where people truly treat people as free, rational agents, as opposed to, and that's not to reduce the whole class antagonism metaphor in Marx to, that chapter, self-consciousness in the phenomenology of spirit. That's not the point at all. The idea is that people will truly recognize each other as virtuous and properly treat each other as free agents under communism. And that's exactly what Hegel is getting at. That's exactly what Hegel is trying to say. And so Marx's economic theories in Das Kapital and elsewhere, like theories of surplus value, which is considered like the fourth volume of Capital, that cashes out exactly the kind of conceptual baggage that capitalism comes attendant with, and what we need to do, even though we didn't finish the whole system. It points to what we need to do in order to realize the special kind of criteria that Hegel sets out for there to be a free society. So what I'm trying to do in my thesis, my doctoral thesis, is try to show that the theories of science that we're using right now don't help us conceptualize ourselves as moral agents, and that we need an enchanted conception of nature. We need an enchanted conception of the universe, one that sees the universe as fundamentally conceptually structured, like Hegel says, in order to fully bring science together with an ethical attitude, to finally look at human society as some sort of ethical substance. And so that's why you should hang on to being a Hegelian as well as a Marxist. And hopefully, I don't know how long this has gone on for. This is a 26-minute rant. That's it. That's why you should be a Marxist. That's why you should be a communist. That's the basic upshot of my understanding of Hegelian Marxism. So you should probably not take the dialectics of nature by Engels as the best example of what dialectics is for Marxism. Dialectics is not a series of rigid rules about how to perform an argument or structure a set of logical statements, right? I would take dialectics to be more what Aristotle was getting at, but a bit more radicalized. So Aristotle says the first start of any kind of science is to sort through the indoxa, right? Indoxa, hopefully I'm pronouncing this correctly. Indoxa is the set of big influential ideas, right, that pervade in society or pervade in the kind of subject area that you're looking at, that you need to sort through in order to work out what's actually really going on. So Aristotle says there's no definitive answers here. Like this is these sorting through the indoxa is not the real stage of actually getting to science for Aristotle. For Aristotle, you need to come up with rigorous deductive syllogisms at the end of your discussion to finally kind of like prove exactly what you were trying to say. To a certain extent, Aristotle is doing exactly the same. The dialectic is sorting through different layers of conceptual complexity to finally arrive at what the truth is. And the idea is to sort through all the different received wisdoms throughout history, because the truth is historical. The idea is to sort through all the different kinds of conceptual linkages that have occurred throughout history, from the most basic to the most complex, to work out exactly what's going on. That's what dialectics is. Dialectics is looking at the specific normative contextual framework that has occurred throughout the entire, it's very holistic, throughout the entire history of the subject matter that you're looking at, to work out what is really going on. That's what dialectics is. It's not, changing from ice into water or from water into steam. That's not dialectics. It's not quantity into quality. That's a specific step in dialectical reasoning. It's probably it's not a great metaphor actually. Watching water boil or whatever. That's how I end today's vlog. This makes me feel a little bit better about the really rude and disgusting things that the middle class people in my classes said. Humans are innately selfish, and the entire history of human civilization can be reduced to the principle of human greed, which is like, I'm not sure how much current that would pass in proper political scientific discussion. that unemployed people are lazy, and uh, what we really saw in the Soviet Russia, in the end, like Stalinist Russia, was actually communism, which is not really true. And there's some very good explanations for why that didn't work, that exculpate Marxism from being blameworthy for what happened in Soviet Russia. Anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed today's vlog. It's a really long one. I enjoyed doing this, actually. It made me feel better. All right, this is a big one. I'll see you guys tonight or tomorrow.